Thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. If you ever feel useless, just remember that UN peacekeepers were in Bosnia. Is a joke often told in the Balkans. The United Nations is an organization founded after World War II with the mission to prevent any future world wars. In theory, they're supposed to bring peace, justice, and a bright future to war-torn regions and countries. In practice, they're just there for PR points whenever the US wants to act as the world police but doesn't want accountability for their useless performative peace accords. Throw in a condemnation being concerned and actively observing the situation and you've got your $67 billion funding's worth. The UN at this point has turned into a glorified international change.org. You don't like that human rights are being abused and war crimes are being committed against minorities in a certain country? Ho ho ho, Buster, we've written up a strongly worded letter asking you to stop. What are you gonna do now? No, wait, you can't use that as toilet paper. It's not environmentally friendly. Arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Putin? Roll out the red carpet, boys. Famine in Gaza? Sorry, no clear evidence, chud. Food as a human right? America and Israel said no. Whoopsie. Basically, anything the US votes against in UN resolutions, it's just not happening. Recognize Palestine as a state? Hell nah. Condemn Russia for the war they started in Ukraine? I mean, you already saw how Trump treated Putin. Although, it's kind of funny how Hungary often votes with America on these issues, even if they are in the overwhelming minority. Except food as a human right, of course. One only needs to look at Hungarian cuisine and their obesity rate, but I digress. The opposite is also true. If America were to unilaterally bomb a foreign country, they could do it without UN approval. Oh wait, they already did that once. The Yugoslav War is how we Balkanoids were first introduced to UN peacekeepers. So some people will immediately dismiss what I'm about to say as biased and untrue simply because I've paraded myself as a Serb and people assume genocide is in my blood. But as my 23andMe test can attest, the only thing in my blood is the love for Allah and driving trucks to Germany. As such, I like to outline some of the missions as defining blunders, as well as shed a light upon the UN peacekeepers' skeletons in their closet. But first, what are the UN peacekeepers and what do they do? Nothing. Okay, but what are they supposed to do? Well, according to their principles and A4P agenda, their mission is to help countries and act impartially in the pursuit of lasting peace and stability, guaranteeing ceasefires against warring factions and protecting hundreds of thousands of civilians. Now, if you laughed, winced, cringed, or rolled your eyes after hearing this statement, don't worry. It's an expected reaction, since based on mountains of evidence, the UN has been quite dogshit at peacekeeping, especially in recent days. Why are they so bad? Well, that's cause complaints seem to fall on deaf ears. But who knows why the UN isn't willing to listen to the pleas of the international community? Maybe they're just that incompetent, or maybe they're wearing a pair of Raycons. No, they're just incompetent. But thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. I love Raycon. I've been using them for over a year now, so much so that I absolutely demolished the case from overuse. So, you know I was happy as a clam when I heard they were sending me their new pair of essential open earbuds. Lighter than both a kilogram of feathers and regular feathers, feeling like they're barely there, giving a crisp, clear sound, Raycon's open earbuds are perfect for those of us who like to be in the field, connected to their surroundings whilst also listening to some sick beats. They got 36 hours of battery life, 8 hours of playtime, and a flexible ear hook. They like to connect with two devices at the same time, and best of all, come in a variety of colors, so you never have to commit fashion suicide just for some good music. And all that for just half the price of other premium audio brands. Outside of fighting the UN, I like to wear them while taking a stroll through my town, reading a book, and especially while working out in public. Who's this guy in the stylish headphones working out in the middle of Cluj? Only possible thanks to Raycon. 3 million people already love Raycons, and how could you not? Hell, they're so confident you'll love their earbuds that they offer a 30-day happiness guarantee. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/ironicallyopen to get 20% off. That's buyraycon.com/ironicallyopen. Right now, you might be thinking of various ongoing conflicts like Ukraine versus Russia, the genocide in Gaza, or any obscure African civil war that's not seen and worthy enough. Perhaps the most well-known and well-documented failure of a UN peacekeeping mission came merely 20 years ago, during the Yugoslav Wars. Essentially in 1995, the UN Protection Force was mandated to protect safe areas for civilians in Bosnia. However, all they could do was stand by as Bosnian Serb forces overran the town of Srebrenica and systematically executed over 8,000 Bosniak Muslim men and boys, an atrocity that has since been recognized by many human rights organizations as a genocide. Which prompts the question, who's more likely to save a drowning Bosnian? The Serb who pushed him in, or the UN? But even before that, the UN proved its utter helplessness during the 1994 Rwandan genocide. A small UN force was on the ground with the mission to monitor a peace agreement, not to stop a massacre. Despite having clear warnings from its own force commander, the UN leadership in New York denied his requests for reinforcements and a stronger mandate. When the killings began, the Security Council's response was not to send help, but to withdraw most of its troops, leaving the remaining few hundred to watch helplessly as an estimated 800,000 people, mostly Tutsi, were slaughtered in a matter of months by the Hutu extremists. And this cycle of a lack of resolve seems to continue, with the UN's recent mission in Mali ending in a humiliating withdrawal and its long-running operation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo facing accusations of ineffectiveness and failure to protect civilians, as was the case in many other conflicts the UN intervened in. But we gotta give credit where credit is due, because the UN as a concept has a noble goal, and in some cases they succeeded. For instance, take a look at Namibia, whose transition to independence from apartheid South Africa was successfully overseen by the UNTAG. In fact, UN peacekeepers have, at the very least, managed to end bloodshed and stop civil wars across the world, like in El Salvador, Mozambique, and Sierra Leone. However, that's where the problems lie.
Are you sure?
As most of the quote-unquote successes of the UN peacekeeping missions fall under a weird gray area. Most of them are actually just short-term ceasefires that leave the affected areas in a perpetual stalemate and ignore or fail to address the underlying conflicts that caused the violence in the first place. Cyprus is probably the best example of this limbo status following UN intervention. Sure, the Turkish invasion was ground to a halt and peacekeepers have maintained a buffer zone since 1964, but nobody expected it to last this long. Even today, Cyprus is left in a weird limbo state, literally split in half with an ethnic conflict that's been frozen but unresolved for 6 decades and counting. Or, for instance, look at Kosovo. You knew I was gonna talk about it eventually. But to keep this can of worms closed, while UN intervention managed to end armed conflicts in the region, there is no concrete resolution over Kosovo's administrative status, even amongst UN member states. Or the comment section. Resolution 1244? Well, the Kosovars said they are independent, so I guess we'll recognize them. Honey, I think we ran out of toilet paper again. Thanks, babe. So, as you can see, the UN peacekeepers' track record is not so effective, to say the least, with some successful missions, plenty of colossal failures, and mostly short-term ceasefires that don't fix the root of the problems. I'm just saying, if your success rate as a worldwide peacekeeping organization is comparable to my win rate in League of Legends, then you're doing something wrong. But why is that? why are UN peacekeepers as inefficient as they seem? Well, with so many cases on their hands, each of them have different causes for their failures. Let's go back to the Rwandan genocide, an atrocity which, by all accounts, could have and should have been averted by the UN peacekeepers. After the signing of the Arusha Accords, meant to facilitate Rwanda's transition after their previous civil war, the UNAMIR was established by the UN to assist in this transition, and do nothing else. Even when they had received proof of the Hutu extremists' plan to genocide the Tutsis, the UNMIR was flat out denied by the UN to raid their weapon caches or get involved in the ensuing conflict. But what's worse than being ordered to sit powerlessly as a genocidal plot unfolds before your eyes? Being told to pack your bags, go home, and let hundreds of thousands of people die. Of course, the UNAMIR force was greatly reduced from 2,165 troops to a mere 270. The UN turned a blind eye to these atrocities and refused to protect innocent civilians or keep the peace in Rwanda. But why was the UN so seemingly determined to abandon Rwanda? Well, it might have to do with a little something known as preferential treatment. Basically, some countries' spheres of influence are more important than others'. In the case of the Rwandan genocide, it's both ironic and poetic that Belgium, of all countries, pushed for the withdrawal of the UN forces. On one hand, they compromised the bulk of the UNAMIR personnel, and on the other hand, Belgian imperialism in Rwanda is what exacerbated the ethnic division between the Hutu and the Tutsi people. And another culprit to point your fingers towards is the USA. It turns out that following the Black Hawk Down incident in Somalia in 1993, the Clinton administration lost all will and interest in involving itself with humanitarian missions in Africa. To be fair, if I was running the most advanced military in the world and got my ass handed back to me by a bunch of guys in rags wielding AKs and wooden boats only afloat with the power of friendship, I would too. This hypothesis that UN missions only follow America's lead didn't come out of nowhere. The USA is the single largest financial contributor to the UN's regular and peacekeeping budget, giving it immense leverage. Not only that, but the US also has veto power, and ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, the US has been an undisputed veto champion. This gives Washington a de facto power to greenlight or kill any major peacekeeping operation, making it seem like the UN is nothing more than a tool of American foreign policy. This kind of preferential treatment isn't reserved just between UN member states, but also inside the peacekeeping operations themselves, with many accusations of nepotism and favoritism floating around. Take for instance UNAMID, UN's peacekeeping mission in the war-torn Darfur region of Sudan. This UN mission is another instance of an affected region left in a limbo state, especially now with the Sudan civil war unfolding. An insignificant little regional war that has been going on since 2023 with just 500,000 dead. No biggie. But I digress. Back in 2017, West Darfur residents accused UNAMID of favoritism amongst their own staff, opting to nepo hire themselves and their relatives instead of recruiting the local populace. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg in regards to UN scandals. Sadly, the UN has a terrible track record when it comes to monitoring their peacekeeping personnel, who use this noble pretext and diplomatic immunity to take part in shady networks of illegal smuggling, human trafficking, and sexual exploitation. Back in 2021, it was revealed that Portuguese UN peacekeepers, part of the MINUSCA mission in the Central African Republic, were accused of and investigated for using military planes to smuggle gold, diamonds, and drugs out of the country and into Europe. But this goes beyond just some people trying to make a buck illegally. The involvement of UN peacekeepers in sexual exploitation and human trafficking is a well-documented and devastating problem that further undermines the very purpose of their missions. Imagine, if you will, you're an innocent bystander of a country in the middle of a civil war. You're excited to see the UN peacekeepers arrive to help you stop the senseless fighting and rebuild your country, only to be exploited and abused by the very people that were supposed to protect you. This is the ugly truth about disgusting people enrolling themselves as peacekeepers in order to abuse and exploit innocent people, and it's an ongoing issue which further damages the credibility of the UN peacekeeping missions in place like Haiti and Sudan. Peacekeepers have been accused of preying on vulnerable women and children, offering them small amounts of money, food, or goods in exchange for sex. This transactional sex is a form of exploitation that takes advantage of the dire poverty and chaos of conflict zones. But worse and more ridiculous, investigations in countries like Bosnia have exposed peacekeepers as customers in organized sex trafficking rings, pretty much becoming part of the very criminal networks they were sent to combat. But no need to worry, the UN has taken this very seriously and vowed to resolve the problem by making a cartoon saying rape is bad.
Why do you want to join the army, son? To rape, sir. Why do you want to join the army, son? To murder and pillage, and of course rape, sir. And why do you want to join the army, son? To keep the peace, protect all women and children, sir. Arrest these criminals, soldier.
A uniform does not give you a license to rape.
They've also made numerous other cartoons to solve very serious world issues, because of which our planet is a much safer place for all of humanity. Hell, they've even solved public defecation in India with one single music video. $67.5 billion budget. So, to recap, the UN isn't taking their job as peacekeepers quite seriously. The UN peacekeeping missions have an abysmal reputation and terrible track record due to their over-reliance on American interests, a bunch of scandals of various magnitude, as well as them adopting useless resolutions that put a band-aid over deeper wounds and hope that they'll heal themselves eventually. It's no wonder that recently some of the biggest players worldwide have started to call the UN's bluff and abuse their status as large military powers. We're well into the 4th year of the Ukraine-Russian war, the one that Putin claimed would be over in 2 weeks. And since then, the battlefield lines are frozen over, and the quote-unquote unyielding Western support is beginning to show its cracks. In fact, one might say that the global support from UN member states has been quite superficial, with many countries refusing to isolate themselves from the Russian energy grid due to their reliance on Russia's vast natural resources. When it comes to human rights monitoring, the UN has not been able to send any peacekeepers due to Russia's veto power, which I can't believe it still has to this day. And other humanitarian aid agencies have provided support when necessary, but couldn't do anything about Russia's non-discriminate bombardments or the destruction of cities like Mariupol. And then you have the Israel-Gaza war, where nearly 2 years after it started, tens of thousands of Palestinians were killed, entire cities were razed to the ground, and Benjamin Netanyahu keeps breaching UN protocol by firing at journalists, humanitarian aid workers, and supply chains directed to the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. And the UN's response has been even worse than lackluster. Benny, if you don't stop bombarding hospitals and kindergartens, you'll have to face our ultimatum, an ICC arrest warrant. What are we gonna do about it now, buddy? Yeah, that arrest warrant means nothing if the member states simply refuse to arrest him. Rólad beszélek, Magyarország. Legalább itt sincs LGBT Pride az utcánkon, csak háborús bűnösök. Köszönöm, Orbán bácsi. Magyarországot szolgáljuk. The UN can try as it might to come up with statements, condemnations, and sanctions. They will simply crash into the Israel wall of apathy and financial stability, courtesy of their generous benefactor, the US of A. The bottom line is, Russia and Israel have been overriding this rulebook of diplomacy, and the UN are struggling to find a way to respond accordingly. But what about the USA's view on these matters? Since America's interests, for lack of a better word, trump above the general UN consensus. The USA's stance regarding diplomatic and external affairs under Trump's administration are all over the place. But what is consistent is that he'll gladly undermine future UN resolutions they deem unsatisfactory. That and funneling billions and trillions of dollars to Israel.
Well, there's no easy way to say this, but somehow Thanos returned. He's going to destroy our universe. Well, the Avengers are gone, sir. What do we do? Don't worry, I'm going to give $5 billion to Israel.
But who would have thought we would get to see Trump rolling down the red carpet for Putin on American soil. Who would have thought that we would get to witness the USA vote against the condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Not even a fence-sitting abstinence. Oh, and you also have Viktor Orban, Trump's and Putin's strongest dick rider, rubbing himself silly at the idea of voting side by side with his idols, despite being an overwhelming minority. So it should be no surprise that Trump actively endorses and encourages this kind of geopolitical bully behavior to the UN's detriment, coming from the man that keeps boasting about his good relationship with a North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. If this became the norm, he would find it easier to achieve his wet dream of assimilating Canada as the 51st state of America, or colonizing Denmark, or the Gaza resort, or whatever. These recent developments have put the UN's position as peacekeeper and negotiator into jeopardy, and some analysts think they will usher in a new age of strong-arming geopolitics, which is actually the same kind of geopolitics but without the PR talk about unity and freedom and whatnot. So the UN peacekeepers and the UN itself as a whole had their reputations down in the gutter for decades. And if things continue as they are, we might remember the UN just like we remember the League of Nations. Which is a shame, really, because as much as I've dunked on them, UN peacekeepers are the best option we've got right now. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not like other countries have a better track record in regards to officiating and maintaining peace. Look at Russia, for example, and the disastrous handling of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. To be fair, it's hard to blame the UN as the sole scapegoat for the mishandling of conflicts worldwide. International courts of justice are just as useless as the UN when it comes to denouncing and persecuting war criminals and totalitarian dictators beyond metaphorical slaps on the wrist. I mean, shit, not a single American has been prosecuted by the ICC nor American war crimes investigated, despite them occurring in the numerous Middle Eastern wars the country was involved in. Simply put, we collectively have weak mechanisms to keep them in check. Ideally, in a perfect utopic world, we wouldn't have greedy, bloodthirsty imperialist warmongers that only care about expanding their imaginary lines on a map. Nor should we have weak-willed countries that claim solidarity against evil empires, yet choose to cooperate with them anyway once their pockets start to get thinner. But that's just blind idealism and wishful thinking at this point. I don't know. Make a new UN with blackjack and hookers.